On this episode of the Video Archives Podcast, Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary uncover Quentin's latest obsession, 1936's The Last of the Mohicans. In this classic tale written by James Fenimore Cooper, two sisters and a British commander are abducted by the Hurons and can only be rescued by the last of the Mohicans. What Ensues is a romantic tale of epic proportions set in the midst of the French and Indian War. After giving a brief history lesson on director George B. Seitz, Quentin and Roger discuss exactly what has drawn them to this title, the different iterations they've watched, and how Randolph Scott may just have won Quentin over. Then, over on Patreon, we continue the theme with a studio film of epic proportions, Northwest Passage, directed by King Vidor. Based on the Kenneth Roberts novel, two friends join Roger's Rangers during the French and Indian War. Quentin and Roger talk about the history of this film along with the intense brutality of some of the sequences. Then, to top it all off, we're back with director George B. Seitz, but this time in the Wild West, Kit Carson. Quentin and Roger discuss the action sequences, what it was like viewing this on 16mm, and the delicate balance of the love triangle in this film. I'm Gala Avary, and joining us now, here's Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary.
Thank you, Gala Raquel Avary. This is Quentin Jerome Tarantino.
And Roger Roberts Avary.
And we are officially saying, kill the Bacalov. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Video Archives Podcast. Before we start, I wanted to just actually say a healthy shout out to one of our customers, one of our season pass members, did very, very well at the Oscars recently. He won, three Oscars. He won 3 Oscars.
He won 4.
Oh, he did.
He won as many as Walt Disney.
Okay, so 4. Yeah, he won 4. And I should know because I gave him one of them. And that is our season pass customer member, Sean Baker.
Congratulations, Sean. I've already told you, but we here at Video Archives love you so much, and we're just so happy for you.
I couldn't be happy.
I only cared about the one I gave him.
Which, by the way, was the best speech of the entire night. Not only the best speech of his, but the best speech of the entire night.
Sean's a class act, that's for sure.
And by the way, and apparently I've heard from quite a few different people that one of the only negatives about him being on this wild ride he's been on is that when it comes to our show, go figure, he's one of those dedicated souls that actually likes to play the Video Archives at home game. So he waits for the clues to what the 3 movies are going to be and then watches the 3 movies before the episode. So he's like seen all 3 of them so he can match wits with us. And the last few weeks has gotten in the way of him being able to do that. So that's the only chagrin he's had in his ascension.
At least it paid off.
Yes. Today we have a movie that we're watching that I'm a little obsessed by.
A little?
Yeah, a little. That I actually have to say that I did not see until this year. It's one of those old movies that's been around forever, and I've always avoided it. Actually, purposely avoided it. And now I broke down and watched it, and I'm kind of agog, all right, about how much I loved it. And that is the 1936 version of The Last of the Mohicans.
The Mohawks take him in tribe, make him blood brother. More. He was born a Huron. I'd bet a rifle against a powder horn, he's still a Huron. Want pale-faced squaws. What?
Stop! Leave him alone! It is 1757, and Fort Henry is under siege by the French and Huron armies. Randolph Scott and Bruce Cabot star in James Fenimore Cooper's classic frontier drama, The Last of the Mohicans.
Starring Randolph Scott and Benny Burns and Heather Angel, and directed by George B. Seitz, who I'm a big fan of, and produced by Edward Small, who I'm also a big fan of, and we'll talk about him coming up in just a second. Something about The Last of the Mohicans that made me always kind of avoid it. I was never interested in seeing it. Something about like the time period just didn't really grab me. The way the Indians looked in it just really didn't grab me. The whole Franco Indian Wars, the imagery just, and I'm not really into redcoats and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the all that imagery and just the time period just kind of just turned me off to such a degree that I've never seen the Michael Mann version. To this day, I haven't seen the Michael Mann version of Last of the Mohicans. I saw The Keep, and I didn't see Last of the Mohicans at the theater. And I remember even reading his film comment in review when he did Last of the Mohicans. But I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to see this. And I didn't see it. And everyone was talking about how good it was. And I didn't see it. Because I was just, I'm just not interested in that story. And as Gala knows, I don't love Randolph Scott that much. So just even seeing the imagery of him didn't really warm my heart to the idea. But the reason I did finally break down and watch it is I'm working on a project on the movie Man in the Iron Mask. I don't know exactly what form it's going to take, but that's produced by Edward Small, the producer Edward Small. And so in going over his career, he had a couple of big hits before that one, but one of the biggest was Last of the Mohicans. So finally, and also Edward Small has become pretty much my favorite producer of movies during this era of the 30s and the 40s, I thought, well, I need to finally see it. As an Edward Small movie, I need to see it.
Yeah.
Well, then I watched it, and I thought the movie was fantastic. It haunted me. I had to see it again. I couldn't wait for us to watch it again. Not only that, I've started seeing other either paraphrase remakes of Last of the Mohicans or just even just straight up remakes of The Last of the Mohicans. And I've even started reading the book. I actually think it might be one of my favorite stories of all time. Every version, I've seen so many. Okay, so I've watched 3 straight up redos of the story. I've also seen the silent version that was done in the 20s. I've seen 2 paraphrase remakes. I'm watching an Italian cartoon that was shown on the Cartoon Network that goes into the story. We're watching a serial, and I'm watching the BBC production of a Masterpiece Theater, 8-episode show. And I like them all. I actually think it's becoming my favorite story, all right? If Man in the Iron Mask is my favorite script, Last of the Mohicans is becoming my favorite story. I love all the characters, Alice and Cora and Magua and Chinichachuk and Uncas and Hawkeye, Colonel Monroe. I know all the characters. They always monkey with the story just a little bit, but when you know the story, you know the characters so well, that's all good. Oh, let's see what they do with it this time and whatever.
Especially when it's George Bruce monkeying.
Yeah. If it's George Bruce monkeying, it's really great. And anyway, so it's like, so I've just become just enamored with the imagery of it and whatever. And so I'm really, really happy. I wasn't planning on maybe doing this for the episode, but finally it was the number one thing on my mind. So I go, we have to do this or I'm just fucking around. That's what we're dealing with today. However, before we start though, I want to give a bit of a little history lesson on the producer Edward Small and his company Reliance Pictures that he did that led to him doing Last of the Mohicans. Edward Small started off as a talent agent, I think in the silent days.
Like at the age of 15, I think.
Yeah, really a young guy.
Like when he was young.
Yeah, everyone kind of knew him as a talent agent. He was really, really well known in the industry. And he produced a couple of early talkies in his day. But what happened was with him and his partner, they started a company called Reliance Pictures. And they had a deal that they could get a distribution deal through United Artists, through their connections. So the idea was they would make 3 movies for Reliance that would be released by United Artists with the idea that they would come up with half the financing and United Artists would come up with the other half of the financing. Now, if the movies didn't do well, I guess that would be the end of Reliance. All right. But if the movies did okay, or one of them did good, or just if United Artists decided they liked working with the guys, well, who knows? Reliance Pictures could become something. Edward Small's idea, he wasn't Roger Corman. He was closer to, he worked on a budget. He definitely worked on a budget, but he was a cheapskate, but not a cheapskate like Roger Corman. He was more like a cheapskate like Joseph E. Levine.
Right.
Was. All right. So the idea is what he specialized in was what I would call A- titles. So there was B titles and A titles. The A titles were the main part of the ticket and were on the top of the bill. They got the main advertising and they got the best show times. And then there was the B title underneath it. Now, they produced a couple of things that did end up as B titles, but for the majority of Edward Small's movies, they were legitimate A titles. But they were what I would call A- titles because he could make them cheaper than United Artists can make them on their own, or MGM can make them on their own, or Warner Brothers can make them on their own. But they still had stars. And they were still
big enough.
They were big enough. That's it. They were big enough. And so in starting these three movies, he knew that this was make or break for him. These movies had to hit. So he had a smart idea that he wanted to base them all on known literary properties. So one of the movies was called Palooka, and it's based on the comic strip character of Joe Palooka.
Joe Palooka.
With Stu Irwin playing Palooka and Jimmy Durante playing his manager and the adorable Mary Carlisle playing his girlfriend. And that was the first movie version ever done of the Joe Palooka character. So they did that one. Second one is a pretty good muckraking expose that based on a book that was really popular at the time called I Cover the Waterfront, starring Claude Colbert. That was a staple on local television for years. And that was his biggest star that he got in his movie. So he did I Cover the Waterfront. And then he had the idea that they should do a movie based on a classic. Because it would be old, it would be public domain, it wouldn't cost anything, but a title that everybody's heard about. But now he's more inclined to go for pulpier versions of title of a classic. It's not Edward Small's way to do The Scarlet Letter or Jane Eyre or Madame Bovary or anything like that. He's going to do something a little bit more pulpier. But he also was very prescient in one other idea, and he would end up following up on this later with more hits in this regard. This is like 1933. So they're still called talkies at this point. They've done the transition from silence, but the silence are still a really strong memory. It's still right there, right in the old wheel pan there. So he had an idea, one, to do a famous movie based on a famous literary classic, but pick one that had been done well and prestigious in the silent days, but hadn't been done in the sound days yet. And so the one that he chose was Alexandre Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo. And for that, they ended up casting the British actor Robert Downey. So anyway, so they make these three movies. Now, somehow United Artists weaseled their way out of paying their half. But regardless, the movies got made anyway, and United Artists released them. And the thing is, it was a big deal because United Artists had a lot of money to pay for prints and advertising. They had a whole advertising department, and they had their own theater chain for the films to play in. Palooka did okay. I Cover the Waterfront did just fine, got okay reviews, and like I said, was a staple forever on television. Count of Monte Cristo was a smash, an absolute smash. One of the biggest hits of the year and one of the best reviewed movies of the year. The film was so popular, it started the cold steel swashbuckling genre of the 30s all by itself. After the success of Count of Monte Cristo, the Selznick Corporation decided to do Prisoner of Zenda. After the success of Count of Monte Cristo, Warner Brothers decided to do Captain Blood, and first tried to hire Robert Downey, and he turned it down. And so then they gave a little unknown Australian actor named Errol Flynn a shot. And then swashbucklers became one of the dominant genres of the 30s, and it was the Count of Monte Cristo that started, Edward Small's production company started. So they did three movies, one of the biggest hits of the year with Count of Monte Cristo. Well, Reliance is now officially set up with United Artists. United Artists is happy. Until they make The Man in the Iron Mask, which is 1939, after those first three movies, they'll make 13 other movies for United Artists. Edward Small's main idea is, he wanted his movies to be hits. So usually whatever was popular like last year or the year before that like did well, he would think, look, let's do our version of that with a twist. So the movie with Robert Young and Barbara Stanwyck called Red Salute, which is sort of like It Happened One Night. It's got a really good script by George Bruce called King of the Turf, a horse racing movie. Well, that's sort of, it's sort of Edward Small's Broadway Bill mixed with The Champ. And, so that kind of thing. But he also realized that there was gold in them their hills when it came to doing classic adaptations, especially if they're pulp-oriented. So in 1936, he does his version of The Last of the Mohicans, directed by George B. Seitz. And that's what we're talking about today. It would be his biggest hit until he would end up doing Man in the Iron Mask in 1939. So endeth the lesson as far as Edward Small is concerned. So Roger and myself watched a live home video Laserdisc of Last of the Mohicans. That looked gorgeous, I thought.
The transfer was fantastic.
It was great, and the cover just looks amazing. It looks really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, what's great is that this was a time when live was like, I mean, they were taking a movie like Last of the Mohicans and giving it an A+ treatment.
Yeah, absolutely.
A++ treatment.
So I'll read the back of the Laserdisc. During the fierce French-Indian Wars of 1757, Alice and Cora Monroe set out to join their father, the commander of a beleaguered Fort Henry. Suddenly, their caravan is ambushed by an Indian war party. Their fate seems sealed until they're rescued by a dashing frontier scout named Hawkeye, played by Randolph Scott, and his two Indian blood brothers, Chinichgook and Uncas. Now the adventure really begins as Hawkeye and the Indians escort the women to safety in this classic version of Last of the Mohicans. Approximate running time, 91 minutes, black and white, suitable for all ages. Okay, so Colonel Monroe, fighting for the British at Fort William Henry, has his two daughters, Cora and Alice. And they're being escorted by Duncan Hayward, who is a soldier for her father, and he's in love with Alice. And Alice likes him and encourages him, but she's not ready to say no to him, but she's not in love with him. So she leaves him dangling miserably. I actually don't like the way she treats him. I mean, he doesn't deserve any better in this movie for like a long period of time. Nevertheless, he is sincere when it comes to her. But the thing is, what they don't know is that Magua, who is like the villain of the piece, is a Huron chief, but he is like a double agent working against the British, but the British think he's one of their great scouts. And so it's his job to escort Duncan and the girls through this back passage to Fort William Henry. But his idea is he's going to lead them right into the Hurons, and they'll kill Duncan. That's the first thing that they're going to do. But now he has Colonel Monroe's daughters, and he really likes, in this version of the story, he's really, really into Cora, the blonde one, played by Heather Angel. And he wants to make her his wife. And the thing is, he wants to kill Alice and make Cora his wife because Colonel Monroe, a long time ago, whipped him for drinking firewater. And he still wears the scars on his back. And they thought, oh, no, we took that dog and we made him a good soldier. We taught him some discipline, taught him the law of the lash, and that.
But he's secretly planning his revenge.
But he's been planning his revenge ever since. All right, and all the other Hurons saw him whipped, and he's a chief. It was just
it's humiliating.
Oh yeah, you understand where Magua's coming from as far as his hatred for Colonel Monroe is concerned. But he knows that nothing will get Colonel Monroe more than the fact that, like, one, he's killed one of his daughters, and two, the other daughter is his wife and is having his children. So that's the whole plan. But now Uncas and his father Chinichgook are officially the last of the Mohicans. The Huron had killed all the Mohicans in their village. They're the only two left surviving. And their best friend is a white trapper named Hawkeye. And they fight with the colonials, but they're not officially members of the Redcoat Army, but they work as scouts. And they see that Magua is taking the girls, and they know that Magua's dirty. So they just decide to follow on the off chance that Magua's up to something dirty, and he is. And so they save them, but it's just like, no, we've got to go. There's going to be 30 Hurons here, in the next 5 minutes. We got to go. And then the whole first half of the movie is just this mad dash trying to get to Fort William Henry before the Hurons overtake them. And the Hurons are just coming after them, and they just don't stop. And that's basically the story. Then they get to Fort William Henry, and then a whole bunch of other intrigues play themselves out. And again, one of the things that I love about this story so much is that is the story. All the other versions of the movie tell more or less the same story, and I like it every single solitary time. And I remember there was one point the first time I watched the movie, I paused it at the 44-minute mark, and I couldn't believe only 44 minutes had passed. I had enough action for 3 movies by that point in time, and it wasn't going to stop. It's just going to keep moving forward and moving forward. So anyway, so you're talking to the wrong guy if you're expecting any kind of sobering thing, because I'm just like the biggest balls out fan of this story, and I've really dived over the deep end. So now I've talked a lot and did a lot of history stuff. So Roger, you watched it for the first time. You hadn't seen any of this versions of it either.
No, not at all. And in fact, the fact that you're so like over the top for this all of a sudden, that got me really excited. I mean, part of it
could have turned you off too, I can imagine.
It absolutely could have. But frankly, something is happening, and it's taken me years to get there, and I think it's also taken you years to get there, which is, and maybe I've spoken on this already, older movies, there was always a little bit of a barrier because I am a visual stimulist. I like modern filmmaking things exploded in the 60s and 70s visually in cinema, and at least that's what I had always thought. And so I'd always kind of just gravitated to those decades and by proxy 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. And I had kind of, the big ones, I grew up like you watching, KTLA, KCOP, Channel 5, Channel 11, Channel 13.
Movie greats and Channel 11, yeah.
Movie greats just running these old black and white films constantly. I mean, I grew up watching these movies. But something about just, older films, as I was growing up, just a little bit of a barrier, a little bit of intimidation, if I'm honest about it. But now that I look at it, it's like this vast continent where they were making, I mean, the quantity of production that was going on in the 30s and 40s was insane, and into the 50s, that are unseen and untouched by both of us, really. And so you get excited by this and Last of the Mohicans, and funnily enough, just like you, I had the same barriers to the story. Something about, that period in history. I had just kind of had a block. And I also didn't go see the Daniel Day-Lewis, Michael Mann epic Last of the Mohicans thing, even though everyone was loving it, like over the top. And in fact, the more people liked it, the more I almost didn't want to see it.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way.
I remember Lawrence Bender coming to me and just talking about what a stud Daniel Day-Lewis was in the movie and how great the movie is and how fantastic. Everything he said should have gotten me excited. Everything he said is things that would normally excite me, but for some reason, which I cannot explain,
it did the opposite.
It had the opposite effect. And I also didn't go see the movie. So I suspect that movie will be in our future.
It'll be the last one that I end up watching. I still haven't seen it yet. So after I finish I think the last one I'll officially be seeing is when I finish the BBC Masterpiece Theater production. So when I'm finished with it, which I like, by the way, when I finish that one, then I'll watch the Michael Mann version.
So then you told me about your Last of the Mohicans obsession, and that this was coming, that this was like, building up and coming. And so one of the things you talked about was the Italian cartoon that was made, like 26 episodes or so, which is basically the book serialized as a kind of cartoon made, I think in the early 2000s.
Yeah, 2004, I think.
2004. I was watching it with my wife, Gretchen, and I flipped for it. I was like loving it.
I love it. I'm up to episode 21 now.
Well, then I got together with you and we watched it, and I had this realization that had I known this before, I wouldn't have had this block. But this takes place literally the exact same time as Barry Lyndon.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, while Last of the Mohicans is happening in the United States and in the New World, we can call it, Barry Lyndon is happening. And I love Barry Lyndon.
Well, the thing that was so funny about it was...
And I like, it was like a third eye opened up. When
it didn't hit... I just seen the movie like a week and a half earlier, I think. So I wasn't thinking about the Barry Lyndon aspect of it that much until it started, because it starts in England, all right, with the king, all right, talking about, how are we going to handle this? Should we just let these savages and the French just have the Americas? Maybe it's not worth it all. No. There's a lot of things we could do there. A lot of,
dare I say, send another ship full of men.
Yes, we can fight these Frenchies off and get those damn heathens. But I mean, it's a very funny scene right at the beginning. It's like a little tableau that sets up the entire movie. We never go back to England again. Just this one scene with the king, the German king, all right, eating his sausage.
Yeah.
And you just started bursting out laughing. Oh my God, this movie's like prologue is Barry Lyndon. This truly has Barry Lyndon as a prologue.
More than that, I am absolutely certain, 100% without question, Stanley Kubrick would have seen this film and modeled his Lord Lyndon and his King George after this film. Kubrick saw this and was like, I'm taking this. When King George meets Ryan O'Neal and he's walking down that line and this is Lord Lyndon, this is Lord Redmond Barry of Lyndon Estate, and he has raised men to go to the New World to fight in the 7 Years' War. He's like, well, very good. Raise another ship and send more men. And then he just goes on.
I didn't see that at first, and then I saw it was funny, and I saw the dichotomy going on. But no, you're right. It's exactly Kubrick's satire of this time when you get to Albany and the British are doing their pirouette dances, while the colonialists are outside looking in the window and thinking, oh, look at these pompy assholes, what's going on with these guys and all their pomp and circumstance, with their harpsichord playing music going on as they do their dances. But one thing that's actually interesting about The Last of the Mohicans is, and this is normal now in the classic adaptations that Edward Small did, whether it be Count of Monte Cristo, Man in the Iron Mask, Last of the Mohicans, the Corsican Brothers, is he would make the movies into movies. The idea wasn't to just capture the novel. It was to take this novel and make it into an exciting movie. And he usually did it so well that forever, anytime anybody wanted to do those books again, they always kind of went back to the Edward Small version.
Yeah.
And incorporated bits of their movie that weren't in the book because they just did a good job turning it into a movie. So consequently, Philip Dunn, who wrote the screenplay for this version of Last of the Mohicans, gets a credit on the Michael Mann version because he figured out stuff.
He figured out the drama.
He figured out drama stuff that wasn't in the book, but Michael Mann wanted to keep because as far as he's concerned, it is the movie.
So I had kind of thought that these movies were not as strikingly visual. But now when I was watching this film, I'm like, well, this is visual the way Kubrick is visual. Mm-hmm. Like you don't have to move the camera to have a powerful image. And they're moving the camera all the time, by the way, in this. But like the strength of the battles, the fight scenes are really, like the poses that everyone's doing, the lighting, like everything about it is strong visual filmmaking. It's not what I thought at all. And so it's kind of super exciting. Yeah. It's kind of like landing in a new world and having all this promise of all these movies that I kind of, I mean, like many things, when I was younger, wrote off because I didn't understand them. And the foundations of Kubrick are and Michael Mann and all the filmmakers we love are in these old films.
Well, you're like Alice in the movie when she goes, look, I'm just really sorry that what I said to you, to Hawkeye, when I first met you. And then he goes, that's okay. You didn't know any better.
Well, in this case, it was true. And then there was a second thing about the movie that, like, I've never been such a huge Randolph Scott fan.
But me neither.
But it's not like I've ever really paid that much attention to him.
Well, I particularly didn't think I liked him that young.
But when I saw this film, I saw him in a completely different way.
Me too. Look, like 3 years or 5 years after this, he'll kind of just settle into his Randolph Scott mode, and he'll be that way for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Here he's still kind of a sexy young stud. He hasn't grown into that Lantern John guy. Yeah. And to me, he's like Redford, all right, and Jeremiah Johnson.
He is like Redford. To me, he's like somebody who's a friend of mine who I've worked with. Was when I started looking at him, I was like, oh my God, he's kind of got a James Vanderbeek quality.
Oh yeah, that's what you were saying. Yeah,
where he's got this kind of stoic face that's carved of stone. He doesn't like try to overdo.
I don't know if I would describe James Vanderbeek as carved from stone, but you know him better than I do. It's not a dig.
No, I mean it in a good. I mean that in a good way. I mean he looks.
I know. I assumed.
Yeah. Both men have these kind of strong heads, these strong faces, these jaws, and they wear their cinematic emotions in a kind of stoic way. Like they don't throw their emotions around wildly.
I've heard a lot of good lines this year, but one of the best lines I've heard this year is when he's talking to Alice, when she's giving him a hard time at the beginning. If you went to assist my father, why aren't you in uniform? Well, maybe I got more sense to wear a red coat in a green forest.
That was a great line. And there was a ton of great lines. The script for this is really dynamite.
Yeah, Philip Dunn just killed it. Anyway, I kept talking about how great it is, about how big it is. But like I said, part of the joy of the movie is the fact that it's this A- production. Edward Small doesn't have the army of technicians that Warner Brothers has to pull off the effects that Michael Curtiz and his action directors, Breezy Eaton, can do when they're doing Captain Blood or Charge of the Light Brigade. They don't have that. All right. They don't have what Selznick has. All right. When he's doing a Prisoner of Zenda, which is as many units as they're needed to create the perfect movie, with as many different directors doing it as per needed. All right. With as many screenwriters for whatever part you need a screenwriter for. All right. They don't have that. They've got realistic schedules. They've got to get it done. But inside of that, he takes it further than he did even with Count of Monte Cristo with Last of the Mohicans. There is just fantastic action scenes. The sky isn't the limit. They've got to keep it together. But to me, but it's just fantastic. And you kept talking. You're like, what are you talking about? This is a big movie.
It feels like a big film. They're making the most out of what they have. They are absolutely. No, and unlike Michael Curtiz, they're not creating like Noah's flood and killing a bunch of people while doing it. Where he made that, recreated the flood, and you can see everybody just getting washed away. All the extras.
No. I'm sure there's a lot of horses that didn't survive Charge of the Light Brigade.
Yeah. That's another thing. That's another thing. But this
actually, that's the one movie that I don't care about because that sequence is so amazing. Well, that's long since dead.
But like the first establishing shot of, I think is it Quebec or whatever city it is, whatever little town.
No, Albany.
Yeah, Albany. It's in Albany, New York. So they show Albany. It feels huge. They take what is not necessarily that big of a set, but it's slightly deep. It's a town, but it's really not that big. But they pack it with extras, thus making it seem gigantic.
Well, one of the things he does, he does a silent movie thing. I mean, here he moves the camera more than he can move on his costume dramas.
Yeah.
Because his costume dramas, what Ed Small will do is he'll spend a lot of money building magnificent sets, but only big enough for the 1:3:3 frame.
Yeah.
So thus you can't move the camera or else you're going to be off the set. So it's just the angles are set up just to show off the opulence.
Yeah. Which was actually not uncommon back then. Fritz Lang built all of his sets around the camera.
Mm-hmm. And so, but here is not so much that. So he's actually able to get a lot of crane stuff and dolly stuff going on. But by and large, he's using the silent film technique where you come up with a tableau and then bring in all the people, and then all the orchestration is happening in and out of that frame.
Yeah, and it becomes this flow of people, this kind of breathing flow.
Of red coats and Indians and wagons and horses and people lined up.
And there's a lot to look at.
Yeah. I've seen a bunch of different versions of this now. Now, as of now, this and the silent version are my two favorite. But like I said, I like them all. Every time they get to Fort William Henry, it usually gets to be, they kind of tell the story in a slightly different way. How much intrigue are they going to go between the British and Hawkeye and the other guys? There's also a situation of what's going to happen between Uncas and Chinook, which can be different depending on how they decide to tell the story. But the
or how they age the two.
Yeah, and
comparatively.
they can even do that. They can even mess around with that too. Like we're watching the Serial, and Uncas is more like
he's like a boy almost.
He's like 13.
Yeah,
he's like 13. But the part that they usually keep pretty much the same is them protecting the girls, trying to get to Fort William Henry.
Yeah.
But then again, after you've seen the story a couple of times, there's certain tropes that are just repeated again and again. There's the massacre by the Hurons, the treaty between Montcalm, the French general, and William Monroe. Eventually, the girls are kidnapped. All right, by Magua. Then you also hear Magua's version of events from his own ears, and every version of the story always has respect for Magua. He's the bad guy. He's scary, but you cannot not respect him. There's something admirable about Magua. Now, it was described best in the cartoon. I've seen two.
The Italian cartoon.
I've seen two animated versions of it. Okay, but of the Italian cartoon, Chinook says the problem with Magua is a great warrior, but he has let hate dictate his heart. He's a great warrior, but you can't be great if you're dictated by hate. So he's a broken man.
Yeah.
Which
is a human thing. An understandable human failing.
The plot lines running through the story is Duncan is in love with Alice, the older sister. Actually, it's the reverse in the book. In the book, Cora is the older sister and Alice is the younger sister. But in this movie, it's Cora is Alice is the older one and Cora is the younger one. And so Duncan has been in love with her since England. She encourages him, but she puts him off at the same time.
It's Captain Quinn.
Yeah.
From Maryland.
Yeah. And then along the way, Hawkeye saves her. And then during the course of their adventure, she really starts falling more and more in love with Hawkeye as it goes on. And in the course of the story, Uncas becomes incredibly infatuated with Cora. And Cora becomes infatuated with him. Like in the cartoon, it's a full-blown love affair. But here, it's more just unrequited love, but they care for each other and they love each other. And there is this lovely thing about Cora. She's the one that is not bothered by the fact that they're Indians at all. She admires Uncas and she loves him. She'll never forget him for what he's done for her. Yeah. And he's gorgeous.
He's heroic.
And he's heroic. And he's strong. He's a great man.
He's a protector.
He's a great man, and he'll do anything, for her. And like to Chinook's regret, he's like getting weak for the blonde girl. All right, he's getting weak. He can't be weak for women. You got to be strong. We got shit to do. It always will come down to a big fight between the Mohicans and Magua, and that plays out different depending on the movie. In some, it ends with a final fight, usually on the hill, between Uncas and Magua. And sometimes Uncas wins, and sometimes Magua wins. And if Magua wins, that means that there will be an ultimate fight between Chinook and Magua. That will be the final big battle of the movie. But that plays out differently depending on which version you see of it. And like I said, I like them all. But I have to say, the version on the Hill of the Silent One is fantastic too. That's really great. I mean, it's great. It's great. But the fate of Cora in this one, and the fact that Heather Angel is playing her, who I just adore. Heather Angel, she's Phyllis in the Bulldog Drummond movies, and she's she's the co-lead of The Informer.
Yeah,
John Ford's The Informer. And if you're fans of the original Three Musketeers, she played Connie. She played Constance, the Raquel Welch character. But anyway, we were big fans of blonde Heather Angel in this, and just the shot that shows her fate. It was
yeah.
You gasp.
Yeah.
You gasp. It's just beautiful.
Now, Quentin, before we bring Gala in, obviously Last of the Mohicans has like struck a strong chord within you. So there's something about the story dynamic. What is it, do you think? What is it about it?
It's a good question. I think
is making you so, because obviously it transcends the versions.
Okay, the thing that turned me away from it is what's turning me into it. I'm actually finding the whole...
Yeah, you're having a complete and total inversion.
Franco-British American Indian Wars fascinating. All right, I can't get enough of it. So I'm finding that interesting. But no, it actually is the characters.
Like there's a revenge element. There are these two women. There's these multiple guys.
I like the revenge element, both from the Mohican side of things, so they want to get the Hurons that wiped out their village, and I like the revenge element as far as Magua is concerned, that he wants revenge on the white Britishers and the redcoats, especially Colonel Monroe, and he wants a personal revenge. He wants to show him what happened, show him how wrong he was, and I like the romantic aspect. I like the idea that Duncan and Hawkeye have to trade back and forth during this adventure.
No, have you started reading? Have you started reading the book?
I started reading I'm in the third chapter now.
Because I'm wondering how much of that, because we see this kind of dynamic.
It's right at the beginning of the trail. They're right at the beginning of Duncan taking the girls.
Right, because we see this dynamic of the two men and the one woman. Seemingly like in George Bruce works, we see that kind of dynamic kind of repeating itself.
I think what happens in the book, I think there's a flirtation that happens between Alice and Hawkeye. I'm not 100% sure about that, but ultimately Duncan ends up getting her in the book. He ends up marrying her in the book. But the love story that gets me is Cora and Uncas. But Magua's story is so fascinating, you love revenge. Yeah, well, he's just such a great character.
Yeah,
he's such a great character, and you can kind of play him as evil as you want, but you still kind of see his side.
You still respect him.
Oh, you absolutely respect him. What's not to respect? I mean, in fact, my only problem with the Italian cartoon, because the Magua there is fantastic, is every time him and Uncas fight, Uncas always beats him. I go, no. It's more, Uncas should not be winning every fight with Magua. He wins one, Magua wins one. I mean, it should be, depends on the day.
Well, yeah, and Magua's a badass.
And Magua's a real badass. And you never quite buy that Uncas could take him out, all right, the way he does in the cartoon. But then also, frankly, to tell you the truth, it is the excitement of the story that, now we gotta go. All right, the Hurons are on our trail.
There's an urgent.
There is an urgency. We can't be fucking around. We gotta go. We gotta make tracks. We gotta keep moving. We gotta keep moving. But then one other thing is, since I did not grow up watching this, but I do know that most of the Eisenhower artists that grew up in the 50s did watch this. I'm seeing all the imagery. Obviously, George Romero.
Yeah.
Saw this movie for his zombie imagery when it comes to the Hurons.
Yeah, they're just coming out of the forest.
Obviously, when
a herd of them.
Obviously, when the Turnbull ACs, all right, the bald guys and the warriors are in their bus and they're chasing after the warriors are running. Well, that's just taken straight from Last of the Mohicans. That's obviously that. The hill people in Hills Have Eyes. Yeah. Michael Berryman might as well be Magua. Yeah. Well, he's an idiot Magua. But they still have that Mohican quality about them. And then on one hand, it's a Western. On another hand, it's a war movie. But on another hand, it's just got horror movie imagery all the way through it.
Yeah.
All the way through it.
I mean, it's technically in the genre of a historical romance.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely on the edge of terror because you have people who are coming from what we can call civilization. They're coming from London or wherever. They're coming from England. These are women in petticoat dresses, and they're out on the trail, and suddenly there's danger jumping out of every tree.
I can't imagine anything more terrifying than being in that canoe.
Oh,
with 5 canoes full of Hurons, 4 apiece.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, and they know how to move.
And they know how to
canoes.
fucking paddle their canoes, man. I was like, well, just fucking kill yourself, all right?
Yeah, keep a bullet in the chamber. Okay, let's bring in Gala.
Okay.
Hey guys, it's Gala here with a very special announcement. The Video Archives podcast is doing our very first live event on April 1st at the Vista Hollywood in Los Angeles, California. This event is an exclusive experience for members of our Patreon. So if you aren't already a member, make sure you go ahead and join before we release registration to the event in the next few days. Want to know more details? Check out patreon.com/videoarchives for more information. See you guys there.
Hey, Gala.
Hi.
Hey!
So, unlike you guys, I have actually seen The Michael Mann Last of the Mohicans. Mm-hmm. It was assigned to me in a movie round robin that I used to do with my friends, and they love to give me very long movies whenever they can.
Yeah, because you're the short movie champion.
Because I like short movies, and so when they can force me to watch a long movie, they do. So that's what my friend did, and I wasn't like in love with the Michael Mann version. And I know Quentin and Roger both haven't seen it, so I won't give any spoilers away, obviously. But it does follow the story of the last.
It's the story,
And Quentin, basically, you would know the story and you know all the plot points. It's just in a different flavoring. Because it's just shot differently. It's just Daniel Day-Lewis instead of Randolph Scott. And weirdly enough, because I love Randolph Scott, and I love Randolph Scott's, like, specifically in the 50s in Westerns with Bud Whittaker. Like, that is my true pairing.
Yeah,
I love the man that can never love again because his wife is out there somewhere. It's like that's a trope that I love.
And that's Randall Scott. Like, he's completely stoic in that way. He plays stoic really, really well.
He plays stoic really, really well. But seeing him young here, and I was looking at him, I'm like, oh my God, like Daniel Day-Lewis is totally modeling himself after his character in this. Like he looks like I don't want to say Randolph Scott looks like Daniel Day-Lewis because that in reality, it's Daniel Day-Lewis is making himself look like Randolph Scott.
Well, they both have strong
Hawkeye.
faces.
But it's like he's trying to transform himself into the Hawkeye character in this movie. And I think he actually succeeds in the Michael Mann version. But as Quentin said, the greatest character, well, maybe he didn't say the greatest character, but my greatest character is Uncas. Uncas is like my man. I love him so much. Philip Reed is not my favorite Uncas because honestly, I know this is corny.
He's very sweet.
He's very sweet, but like I love the cartoon.
I love the cartoon.
Uncas.
In the cartoon, when I after we watched a couple of episodes, Gala came over and I said, okay, you got to watch some of this cartoon. And so I popped it on. And at the very end of the cartoon,
the first episode,
is it Cora? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's Cora.
I think it's Cora. Like they're driving away in the wagon or whatever, and
she's Cora's like, "I'll see him again.
I'll see him again." And then you see what she's thinking in her mind, and it's Uncas's face. And then
they zoom in on Uncas.
They zoom in, and it's like it's so sweet and simple and effective.
No. I actually would say of the Italian cartoon is my favorite Uncas.
And Gala was totally like, "Yeah, girl."
He's almost too good.
Okay,
all right,
so
you know.
Like,
and
my friends, I have lots of crushes, right? Like right now, like Bill Hurt, like I'm in love with him. But my all-time number one favorite cinematic crush is Chakotay on Voyager. And I love Robert Beltran, and I love the whole Akuchi Moyo, we are far from the lands of my sacred ancestors. I love it.
Quentin, I don't know if you've ever watched Star Trek Voyager. Robert Beltran.
She's talked about Robert Beltran on that show a lot.
Yeah, and his character is Native
I know
American.
it. I only know it through
my love of him. He's a vegetarian, anthropologist, Native American with a giant facial tattoo. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Robert Beltran in Voyager is my Uncas.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
But I love Uncas, and I love Uncas in this, and that moment that you spoke about. Like when you see what happens to Cora, it's just like I actually rewound and I had to watch it again because I was so shocked. And then him in the river and like the whole fight that unfolds. And as you said, it's different in every single iteration. So like you don't really, even if you've seen it or read the book, you don't really know if
you don't know how they're going to wrap it up in the third act because they all can go their own way.
So it's kind of the cool thing about it is that like no matter how many of these you see, you're going to see a different version each time. But they're still the same.
But they're still the same. All right.
It's the weirdest thing.
It's just how they emphasize this versus that.
Like, is there any other story that does that the same kind of way?
Yeah, I guess you could say the same thing.
Spoilers a little bit, I guess.
No, but particularly though, King Arthur, you emphasize this, you de-emphasize that. All right. You bring up the Knights of the Round Table more. You bring up the love triangle more.
So, as far as characters go, because Uncas and Cora is like my one true pairing. Like I think they're fantastic together. Alice, in every single version she is in, I just find her so annoying. I don't know what it is about Alice. Maybe it's the way that she treats Duncan.
I kind of find Duncan annoying, to be honest.
Duncan's a fucking pill in this one.
Yeah.
They go out of their way to make him a dick, all right? More than he deserves in the book, anyway.
And that's the thing is
and other versions, they're nicer in other versions.
They are definitely nicer. Like, this is the most understandably Duncan is a pill version.
I mean, he's there to play the starchy guy who is not Uncas.
And he's supposed to be, and he's not Hawkeye. And he's like, they are just savages, And the white man, he's no more than a savage himself.
They spent so much time with the savages, they're practically savages on themselves.
And he's a military clown, all right? Everything is about the British. Everything is about the rules and the regulations. Really, Alice, you must be so familiar with
the natives.
With the goddamn degenerate natives
of this infernal island.
It's interesting to me because we're talking about all the different versions of Last of the Mohicans, and then the other two movies that we're going to talk about later in this episode are kind of like the knockoff Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to see them deal with these kind of same character arcs, same but different. And do I like this Duncan archetype better in other movies? Yes, I do very much. But I don't know, just Alice should be with Duncan. Like, Hawkeye needs better. I don't know. Alice never grows on me. I just don't know what it is about her.
I really like the Alice. I really like Benny Barnes in this. Now, I actually don't think Benny Barnes is like the best casting for Alice, but I like her, all right? And I like Benny Barnes. She's a really interesting actress, and she has a real soft spot in my heart because she played the supporting character of the female pirate captain, Anne Bonny. In one of my favorite swashbucklers, The Spanish Main. Yeah. And she plays Anne Bonny, and she's just terrific in it. And she's neat. So I don't think she's perfect casting. And I disagree with you. I actually think, she falls in love with Hawkeye. I mean, she just falls in love with him. So there's no walking it back or anything.
Which we appreciate that.
Yeah.
We appreciate no flip-flopping.
Yeah, there's no flip-flopping going on. And I'm very moved by the scene where it looks like they've got them to Fort Henry, and then it looks like Hawkeye and his pals are going to leave, like later that night. And so she shows up. So you were going to leave without saying goodbye? Well, really, what's the point? I mean, our lives are different, and this and that and the other, and I could do this, and it just doesn't make sense for us to become friends. I even like that. That's his sentence. It doesn't make sense for us to be friends. And she goes, "I'm not asking you to make sense. I'm asking you to stay here, to be with me, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's the dumbest thing you've ever done. I'm still asking you to do it." I think that's as lovely a yield to give way to love as I've ever heard. All right. Of like, okay, no, maybe it doesn't fit your plans. Maybe it doesn't make sense. And maybe it's all, but I'm asking you to do it anyway to see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that what we all do when we get married? We all had other plans.
Yeah. Love got in the way.
Yeah. Love got in the way. I even like that. Wow, she's kind of talking over Hawkeye's head, but he even still gets it. Is
this Alice, your favorite depiction of Alice in all that you have seen thus far?
I think I would go for the Alice and the Italian cartoon.
I think the Italian cartoon
is
amazing. I think it's amazing. Oh, and I loved it because you shared it on Patreon that you were like kind of just watching it, like without saying that we were going to cover this.
Yeah.
And I love how everyone in the chat just started watching it also.
Yeah, I know.
So when they're listening now.
There's a great scene in the cartoon where there's this point where they go to an Amish village to give them shelter. And so they give them Amish clothes, so they have to dress like the Amish. And then the French show up. Mm-hmm. So they have to just act like Amish. Because if the French think that the Amish are hiding the British, they'll just wipe out the whole fucking village.
Yeah.
So a real asshole British soldier goes into like monkeying around with Alice. And Hawkeye, dressed like an Amish guy, tries to stop him. And the guy just smacks Hawkeye, and he smacks him 3, 4, 5 times, and Hawkeye just has to take it, even though he could kill this guy. He has to take it because he can't fight back, or else the entire village will be killed. It'll be revealed who he is. And he just takes this beating. And then now the soldiers are leaving, so he has to leave. So he's not able to defend Alice. And he's just demoralized, taking this beating from this fucking French asshole in front of Alice and everything. And Alice goes to him, she goes, Hawkeye, you've protected me day after day, but you were never more brave than you were right this moment. You were never more brave than this moment.
Wow.
That's the power of the cartoon, of the Italian cartoon. It's special moments like that I love that animation kind of lends itself to. Mm-hmm. And it's just wonderful. Now, Magua, his story, Roger used the word noble, and like maybe it isn't noble because it is revenge, but there is a nobility about it.
No, yeah.
I've noticed that
there's a nobility of how he lives his life, the man he is.
All the actors who play him in the versions that I've seen all play him as a proud, strong guy who is a leader. Yeah. I mean, he's a leader of his people.
Absolutely. He's a Huron chief.
Yeah, and yes, he's
and how dare you whip a Huron chief?
And yes, he's injured in the way that he's following the path of hate and all of that. Yeah, all of that's true, but everybody always portrays him with this like noble dignity.
Well, it's noble dignity matched with unspeakable cruelty.
And you've mentioned several lines, like the red coat and the green forest line. Mm-hmm. And when we watched the movies that we've watched that are kind of like the knockoffs, I've heard that line even repeated in there. And it's just interesting because it's like, wow, they really knocked it off to the point where they're taking the fan favorite lines and they're incorporating it in there because it's in the DNA.
They become tropes. They become, whistles. And one thing I would add to the animated version, Chinishtakuk, which is a little too hard for the kids to say, so they just call him Great Serpent. Great Serpent and Uncas are practically superheroes, all right, the way they're able to fight. But that's really cool. And there's always like a fight. There's always some big fight per episode. But one of the things I really like about Uncas in the cartoon, Uncas is like Navajo Joe if Navajo Joe's wife hadn't been killed.
Yeah.
He's a Navajo Joe, not lost, not driven mad by revenge. Because Navajo Joe is as crazy as Magua is by the end of the movie. He's driven mad by his revenge. Mm-hmm. And Uncas isn't driven mad by revenge, but he's as capable. He even looks like Navajo Joe, and he's as capable as Navajo Joe. And he fights in that same blitzkrieg fighting style that Navajo Joe fights in. By the way, but we haven't even mentioned the theme song, which is just like
Mohican.
Yeah. Mohican.
Mohican.
I'm sure Josh will play it
every morning when I wake up. It's the first thing that goes through my head.
In Israel, I just walk around with this as like my theme song just playing in my head all fucking day, and no one knows what I'm doing, and I'm just hearing this Mohicans. Especially when you watch 3 episodes a day. It gets in your head.
So this is available to watch everywhere. I watched mine for free on Plex, which is great, but honestly, if you love Last Mohicans, there's an unlimited resource of material to do. There's the book. There's several cartoons. There's this movie. There's the silent movie, the Michael Mann version.
You can
BBC miniseries.
You can literally go down the daisy chain that I am, and I would recommend it to anybody. And by the way, I have a really good time talking on the message board, but I never had a better time than bringing up my Last of the Mohicans thing, because a lot of people were really able to contribute because they write from all over the world. So there was all these people who had actually watched they're commenting specifically on the Italian cartoon, even Italian guys commenting on the cartoon. But you also had guys who were talking about the show from England, all right, from the BBC production, and they're telling me specific things about that, and then there's the German guy talking about the German version, Now, here's the thing is, we did our episode on the spoilers. We're not going to do that on the Last of the Mohicans per se. We want to do that on other things, but there's like too much to do on this, but we decided to do adjunct. So the next two movies will be movies that were inspired by the success of Edward Small's Last of the Mohicans, and we'll talk about that. But as we continue with other episodes, I'm going to keep throwing some of these Last of the Mohican versions in the 3-movie mix. So without making it official, we'll still start knocking off some of these.
So join us on Patreon to continue the conversation. Patreon.com/Video Archives. We're going to be talking about King Vidor's Northwest Passage, as well as Kit Carson, also directed by George Seitz.
And by the way, that's also where the free message board is that Quentin was just commenting on. So there's a free message board and also a paid message board if you want to come over and chat with us about the movies and also see our free weekly newsletters.
Yeah, come chat with Quentin and I.
To hear the rest of this episode, including discussions of 2 more movies and our award winners, sign up for the Video Archives Patreon. You'll get access to full Video Archives episodes, the Video Archives After Show, exclusive merch, and more. Head on over to patreon.com/Video Archives to subscribe today. The Video Archives podcast is hosted by Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary and produced by Josh Richmond and Gala Avary. Find out more about the show and get Video Archives merch at videoarchivespodcast.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Video Archives and on Instagram at Video Archives Pod.